What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Gsluke here with our round one prop preview for this week's Honda Classic, my hometown event. I'll be on site tomorrow scouting out the course there at PGA National, but here in this video, going to break down what to expect from the venue, what we saw there in 2022, so you can use some of that research, some of those averages to go out there and attack both the underdog and the Prize Picks board. So I'm going to give you my top plays on both sites now, not just looking at Prize Picks. I know a lot of you out there are starting to play over there on underdog as they don't have the multipliers like a Prize Picks, which can go in both directions, right? It's nice to have a 12.5x, a 13.5x payout, but also when you're taking all fades or all plays in one direction, it's also a good thing to be able to get the regular payout. So we'll be going over both sites, and then like I said, starting it off here with a look at the course, which last year was played well over par. The scoring average was 1.34 over, and your winning score was just 10 under par for Sepp Straka. So players aren't going to be taking this place nuclear every single day, but there are a few low rounds out there. You can see Sepp Straka, right, shot 4 under par there on Sunday under some of the most difficult conditions all week. Matt Jones a few years ago was able to get it to 7 under par on round one. So if you have your game, you can certainly make birdies around this place, but the averages indicate a much more difficult course. And it's not really from the ball striking. The course isn't overly long. You can see plays to right around 7,000 yards. The ball striking isn't that difficult either, at least in terms of hitting fairways and hitting greens. Your fairway percentage is well above your average at 68.2%. which is 2.3% higher than average. And your green regulation percentage, though it's a little bit smaller, a little bit lower than what you're used to seeing, it's still just 65%, right? It's only 3% lower than what you're used to seeing. So that difficulty isn't coming from hitting the fairways or hitting the greens, but more so about how penalized you are when you do so. There are, I think, 18 water hazards on property. Actually, might even be more than that. I know that there's water on 15 out of 18 holes, and usually year in and year out, the most water balls of any track are here around PGA National. So you're going to see a lot of people making bogeys, doubles, potentially even triple bogeys on holes that get into that water when you're getting out of trouble. And even when you're missing in sand bunkers, some of the tough chips out of the rough around this track, pretty much every time you're going to be missing the mark, you're going to be looking at a half a stroke to even an entire stroke and a half penalty. So that's where the difficulty comes in. Not so much from, the fairway or green numbers, right? You're going to have guys at like 11 greens, 11 and a half greens. They don't have a fairway board up on either site, but if they did, it wouldn't be an overly hard course. It'd be like 8.5, maybe 9 fairways for some of the top guys, kind of like what you're used to seeing. In terms of your weather, we're a little bit far out. I'm doing this here on a Tuesday night, but you're looking at relatively benign conditions. I mean, it's flat across the board. I mean, the sustained winds don't get higher than 9 or 10 miles an hour. The wind gusts are a little bit worse in the morning wave. You can see closer to like 14, 15 miles an hour there at 8, 9 a.m., but not anything to throw players off. You're used to these kind of conditions in Florida. It's always going to be a steady, like at least 7 miles an hour sustained wind, and 14, 15 miles an hour, that's just an afternoon breeze. In fact, these 8, 9 miles an hour sustained winds with the wind gusts getting to double digits for just a few hours there in the afternoon is as good as it's going to get in Florida. So for the weather perspective, it looks next to ideal. Should be warm out there too. So I would expect the ball to travel a long way. That being said, I am projecting the course to play very similar to what we saw there in 2022. Last year, winds weren't a huge factor except for one day where one of the afternoon waves got hit by slightly higher winds. It was like 20 mile an hour winds, 25 mile an hour winds. But outside of that, the entire tournament played exactly what we're going to see there for Thursday. So when we look at the fairway percentages, when we look at the green and regulation percentages, they should be pretty much on par with what we should expect to see this year, which is going to help us out with our analysis. A few things to note. The birdie or better average, so last year, was 2.865, which is way lower than what you're used to seeing, right? So only 2.86 made on average. And then your score, right, 71.34, right, with the 1.34 over par average. And then your green and regulation average was 11.25, which is lower than the 65% number here because they count intermediates and fringes as greens and regulation. So this number is a little bit inflated because of that. The true green and regulation mark was closer to 11.25 greens. Sorry, I jumped there. My cat was over there jumping in the corner. Scared the crap out of me. Let's get back into this. So with all that in mind, Let's take a look at the prop board. So we're going to go over one prop here for all the categories over here on Prize Picks. And again, all of the props I'm taking are on the Patreon, but just want to give you an idea for how I'm attacking all of these boards. So for strokes, Harris English was somebody I actually had a fade for greens regulation earlier. They had him at 11.5 greens, so we'll start with that prop. I had his under at 11.5. Now he's down to 11. I still like the prop, but I don't love it nearly as much as before. And the idea here is the average was right around 11.25 greens, and Harris English, a well below average player when it comes to greens regulation. In fact, ranked outside the top 150 on tour the last 2 full seasons he played on tour. So I liked it at 11.5, not so much anymore. So what we want to attack now is this, over 70 strokes. He's, again, I would classify him as maybe an average player at best. Now, in terms of just pure on scoring, he's a much better player than he is at hitting greens and regulation, but the average is going to be right around 71.34 strokes. That means that at best, if Harris English were to go out there and shoot even par round one, I think that he would be thrilled with that. Pretty much everyone in the field would sign up for an even par score because the cut line is likely to be at least 2 over par. Sometimes it's 3, 4, even 5 over par at the Honda Classic. So going out there, shooting 70 the first 2 days is more than enough to make it there to Saturday and Sunday. So somebody like in Harris English that I just really classify as an average player for this field is projecting for much closer to 71 or even 71.5 strokes than the 70 mark here on the board. So you can imagine that a lot of the guys here at strokes I would lean on the over on, but I'll just give you a little word of caution. Over here on Underdog, you have a lot better value. So if you're looking at the strokes board, you can see they have Sepp Straka at 69.5 strokes. He's at 70.5 on Prize Picks. Do they have Harris English? I don't believe they have Harris English on this board. So that's why I'm taking him over here on Prize Picks. But in general, if you're looking at fading the strokes board, a lot of options over here. In fact, I took Sanjay, Chris Kirk, and Shane Lowry, and they were at 68.5 strokes. They've already all been bumped up to 69 strokes, which makes sense. No one should be projected to shoot 1.5 under par at this course when the scoring average is well over par. And sure, it's possible. There are going to be guys that shoot better than 2 under par every single day. But when you're looking at a 50-50 prop trying to take advantage of the board, there's a lot of edge to be had when you're projecting somebody 2.5, sometimes 3 strokes off the scoring average. So Harris English there, definitely a prop that I like for the over. And we'll circle back on the underdog side here in a second. And the next prop I want to touch on is Denny McCarthy under 3.5 birdies. And he's one of the better players in this field, so it makes this a slightly uncomfortable fade. But I'll remind you guys, the average for birdies last year was 2.865, right? So 0.7 birdies less than, the projection we're looking at here. And the thing is, for Denny McCarthy, for as solid a player as he was, for as consistent a player as he has been over the last 6 months, he still ranks outside the top 120 on tour when it comes to birdie or better percentage. So not a hyper-aggressive player, not the best iron player on tour, and while he can go out there and hoop a bunch of 25 to 40-foot putts, it's doubtful that he's going to make 4 or 5 of those in an entire round. So for Denny, I'm relying on the numbers. I'm looking at the averages. Even though he is such an exceptional player, because he lacks that aggressiveness, lacks the high birdie percentage that we're looking for in a lot of these plays, is somebody that I'm going to be avoiding here. And next up, go to the next board, birdie better matchup. I avoid this like the plague. So if you have any questions on that, feel free to go ahead and toss them in the comments. I'm willing to give you my opinions on matchups, but never anything that I bet myself, unless there's a massive edge between the two plays. Usually a category that I avoid like the plague, because there's close to a coin flip as humanly possible. You can't really take advantage of the weather when you're looking at matchups, and usually Prize Picks matches up the birdie or better percentages pretty well. So unless you're looking at an injury situation or maybe a tee time situation where somebody's going to be playing in better conditions than another player, it's a tough scene to be had. So that's why I avoid them. Greens regulation, I don't have a prop on here that we're officially going to take for this card, but a lot of unders, right? I took the Harris English under at 11.5. I also had Seabass under at 11.5 greens. Both of those were already bumped down, but a lot of the board, a lot of the guys that have a lower greens and regulation percentage are players that you could consider. And again, if you're looking for all of the props I'm taking, they are on the Patreon, all of the write-ups for that too. But you can use that same kind of idea, right? Try and target the more shoddy iron players in the field and take their unders, and that would be a good way to attack it. Holes played seems to be maybe the best category here for Thursday, as they have guys like Eric Van Rooyen, they have guys like Webb Simpson up on the board. That first off, Eric Van Rooyen, the best odds you can get on him to make the cut are minus 188. So he's minus 188 to make the cut. Webb Simpson is minus 150 to make the cut at this event. So why wouldn't we take their over? So I guess I just gave you a little extra pick there to add to it. That was meant to only be on the Patreon page there. Oh, well, give you guys a little extra pick, right? Can't hurt. Like both their overs because they're at least minus 150 to make the cut. So it's a numbers play. If you look at my projection sheet on Patreon, I do a made cut percentage for every player in the field. Makes it really simple to go through and do so, but even when the sports books are backing it up, just makes it a little bit of a more solid pick. So definitely like those two overs, which are going to be especially useful when we go to make our card here because we're taking so many fades, right? We took a over on strokes and under on birdies are better. I'm taking an over on Thomas Dietrich for hole 18 strokes too. So by mixing in those overs for holes played, which again are going to take 2 days to complete, these holes played props are whether a player makes the cut or not, which again happens after the second day. But this whole 18 shot here, I also like the fade for. So we have to mix in a few positive stances to try and get that full payout. And if we do 2 of them, right, if we get the second holes played prop, then you get an entire, I think, 13.5x payout. Yeah, 13.5x, extremely juicy there. But this Thomas Dietrich prop I like a lot too, because last year the birdie rate on 18 was just 34%, and it changed based on pin location. So when we get the pin sheet, if it looks like it's going to be a more simple pin, maybe we don't nuke this category nearly as much. But if it's going to be a 34, maybe a 30% hit rate for birdies or better, we would have to take the over, right? If 70% of the field is going to make a par or worse, we would be dumbfounded not to take the over here. A few of the other players, like Cameron Davis, one of the more aggressive players, so maybe I avoid him. Sungjae makes a habit of birdieing that hole. But for Thomas Dietrich, a player that's never been here before, and though he has the length to get down into, because of the water on the right, so many players end up laying up that it becomes an execution hole, right? Whether you can birdie a tricky green from right about 100 yards out, and most players, right, about 30% of them, probably even less, probably only like 20% of them are usually going to get that done, right? That extra 5 to 10% that usually makes birdie are guys that get home in 2, right? That hit the perfect drive, have the balls to go out there, hit the perfect 3-wood out there, and that's why I like the over. Not a ton of guys are going to go out there and do so. So if you play this as a 5-man card, which you can, right? I gave you the Webb Simpson there as well. You do get the extra payout, but I'd always recommend splitting it up, playing a few smaller cards too. Again, if you want all of the prize pick stuff I'm going at, it is posted on the Patreon in the description. Now let's look at Underdog, where a lot of stuff got bumped. I have to say that prize picks, they only bumped like half the stuff that I posted, so at least part of it is still up there. They at least sit behind some of their projections. Underdog literally bumped everything. So a few of these are actually new props that I'm adding in now. One thing to say is Sepp Straka, he was at 3.5 birdies over there on Prize Picks, and they bumped up down to 3. So that was a prop that I took, but he's still at 3.5 on Underdog. So I'd love that prop as well. Last year in the win, he only covered it in 2 out of 4 rounds. So if it was a 50-50 prop and this guy won the tournament, you get the idea why I'm going to like the under. On top of that, he was ranked outside the top 150 on tour when it comes to birdie or better percentage. So just a slam dunk prop, really. I mean, if his best self is only going to be 50-50, enough said, right? The Chris Kirk over and this Denny McCarthy over. So it's over on hole 12 strokes. You can even include Alex Noren. You can see it was like kind of highlighted on there. All of these guys for the par 3 strokes, you have to hammer for the over. Every hole that's a par 3 at PGA National, all 4 of them plays well over par. 2 of them are over 200 yards. 3 of them have water on them. The one that doesn't have water is the one that's 230 yards on property. They're all bears. And even if you go out there and you make a birdie at one, the odds are you're at least going to bogey one of the other ones. So these have an incredibly high push rate. If you were to take this 4-man card and insure it, you'd be looking at just a crazy high floor with the card. The one thing I have to say is, unfortunately, if a bunch of these were to push, right, if let's say 2 out of the 3 par 3 strokes were to push, I think you end up getting refunded if it's a 2-leg insured card. So that's not ideal. That's slightly annoying. So maybe you just run it without insurance and say YOLO, right? Hope that they all go out there and hit. I'd say that's the one bad part about it. So if you want to look at a few other props, they do have bogeys up, and the average bogeys last year was 3.68. I liked the Pendrith over at 2.5 bogeys. Now he's up to 3. But there's a bunch of the rest of the guys on here at like 2.5 bogeys. I mean, even like Chris Kirk, right? You could take Sanjay. I would probably avoid. He's really good at avoiding bogeys. He was number 1 on bogey avoidance last year. But even some of the guys at like 3, Alex Noren at 2.5 bogeys, you can consider all of these for an over, especially because the average was 3.688. So just well above that. I know that these are better than average players, but still more than, like, I'd say 2/3, sometimes even 75% of the field is making at least 3 bogeys per round. So keep that in mind. A lot of props that you could take there. I would stick to the main 3 that I had on there, but all of those bogey props, stuff I'd consider adding too. But that is all I've got for this video. Hopefully you feel a little bit more prepared to get those slips in. Just remember, guys, 10 under par wins this thing. The best score there on Sunday was 5 under par for Cameron Young, who finished in 16th place. That's as good as you're going to see, right? So when you see a board of guys that are at even par, right, just don't think that they're free props. Just do your research, right? The average is 71.34. Greens regulation, I know it seems low, right? The average was 11.25. Just don't get tricked by it, right? Difficult course. If you play these plays, best of luck. Hopefully you go out there and cash out with the tail. Check out the Patreon if you're looking for all the props that I have to offer. And until next time, guys, best of luck.